Okay, here we are back again. I don't know if that got erased, what I just said, but we're looking at your ability to identify capillaries, arteries, and veins from the structure of their walls. So here's a diagram. They might also give you a picture, and we'll have a couple coming up, right? But if you just look at this for a little bit, you see the key differences. Thicker walls. That's what arteries have compared to veins, and especially compared to capillaries. They don't tell what specifics they're looking for, except for thickness, I think. But the thickness is due to a muscle part, right? All of them have an inner lining, inner thelium, and inner lining. That's capillaries, veins, and arteries. All have an inner lining. They all have an outer covering of connective tissue, right? Just a little bit in a very little bit in a capillary. It's the thickness of the muscle wall, which you can see here in the artery compared to thinner vein. That is a distinguishing factor. Okay, so capillaries have permeable walls that allow exchange of materials between da 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 da. This is again diffusion, thinness, right? And the speed of diffusion being very slow means if things are going to diffuse in and out of a tube, its walls better be very thin. And here's another, if it's part of a diagram, this also tells you, sorry, this also tells you that this is a vein. Veins are the only ones that in them have these little flaps called valves. Okay, so especially if they're labeled a valve, you know that's a vein for sure. V for valve, V for vein. Okay, so now we get into some functional aspects, and one of those has to do with pressure. And here they tell you they would like you to know this, that because they are taking blood right from the heart where it just contracted and pumped it, which means high pressure, that blood is pushing against the walls from the inside out much more strongly than by the time it gets to the veins, right? That arteries convey blood at high pressure from the ventricles, because that's where that blood is coming from, that's getting into the arteries, right? And the muscular walls and the elastic fibers. What does elastic mean? Elastic is due to a protein called elastin that is structured such that if it's stretched, it goes right back, just like a rubber band, which is elastic, right? And then they assist in maintaining blood pressure between pump cycles. They want you to be able to make a statement like that or identify a statement like that, right? That it's the muscle and the elastic fibers, which are elastin protein, that allow arteries to, if you can see my hand now, when the blood goes through them initially, they're going to swell because that blood is pushing against their walls, but the elastic muscles and elastin protein in them is going to cause them to go right back. That's what elastic means, right? Just like any kind of elastic kind of thread or whatever. Okay, so here's the idea about veins and those valves. So by the time it gets to veins, that blood is at very low pressure, and to get it back to the heart, um, what has evolved is a system where they get a little bit of help from these valves, right? And the muscles that are surrounding blood vessels, many but not all, right, are surrounded by muscles. And then when those muscles contract, they squeeze this tube. Well, these flaps have evolved to be arranged in such a way that they open only in one direction. So when this muscle squeezes this tube, right, the blood gets pushed back this way, but it hits these walls and it shuts them like doors that only swing in one direction. But these doors, these valves, can swing open in this direction, and this is what causes what's very simply referred to as one-way flow. The valves in veins, and we're going to see the valves in the heart when we get there in a second, they cause the flow of blood to only go in one direction, preventing backflow. Again, any words that are in this syllabus are also possible to show up on a test. Okay, so now, if we trace this double circulation, right, we have again the idea that it goes from ventricles to arteries, branch into capillaries, which converge into veins, and then back to the heart. Now, they don't really tell you in the syllabus in red ink very specifically that they want you to be able to trace it incredibly specifically, but why not? Let's do it, okay? Because they do tell you they want you to be able to identify the 4 chambers of the heart by a diagram like this and the characteristics of that diagram. So I'm going to do that, and this is not the greatest diagram in the world, and I'll tell you why in just a second to do that. Because first of all, you have to have some perspective about left and right, right? Do you see this? This is labeled as the left ventricle. They could have made the diagram in a way that you could more easily tell it was the left ventricle. They did that only a little bit, and I'll get to what I'm talking about in a second. But you notice, wait a minute, I'm looking at this heart. This is the right side. This is the left side, right? I learned that when I was a little kid. Well, this is what you have to realize, which is why they put this person here with their feet sticking out towards you. You're looking at this person head on, which means their left arm is coming out this way, and that means this is the left ventricle and the left atrium. Okay, that's another thing you need to remember is that the atria are on the top. Blood is coming back into the heart from the top down. And then it's leaving the heart from the top, but then very quickly, the biggest artery, the aorta, branches and takes it downward, most of it. Okay, so now let's go back again and connect this pulmonary circuit to the lungs compared to the systemic circulation, which is really all over the whole body, not just down, but also up, right? But every diagram looks like this. We have a cycle, circulation. That means we can start anywhere. We're going to end up at the same place if we follow it, right? So let's start where blood is pumped out from the left ventricle. It comes out the aorta. That's the only other blood vessel they named in the syllabus. And the aorta branches real quickly to take oxygenated blood to above it, which mostly means your head, right? Because your heart's way up there. And then down below, the descending branch of the aorta is very big. It takes blood to everything else. Branch, 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 right? They only show, this represents all the different branches to your left arm, to your right arm, to your left leg, to your right leg, and takes blood to them. Capillaries in them then converge, and it comes back into the other side of the heart. Again, coming back into an atrium. It comes back both from the head and from the rest of the body into the right atrium. So left ventricle, out arteries, capillaries, veins, back into the right atrium. And it's lost most of its oxygen by the time it gets back there. The combined vessel from the top and the bottom that brings it into the right atrium is called the Vena Cava. They leave that name Latin. The aorta is the biggest artery in the body. The vena cava is the biggest vein. They didn't put vena cava in the syllabus anywhere here. So then when the atria contract, it sends blood to the ventricle right below it, right? And that goes through one of these valves that, just like in the veins, keep blood going only in one direction. When this ventricle contracts, just like that one did, it pushes this valve shut so it doesn't go back into the atrium where it came from. It can only go out this artery again. This is an artery away from the heart, which also has a valve here, which we're going to name in a minute, right? And then that branches right next door, because if you think of where your heart is and where your lungs are, right, they're right next door, and takes that blood to the lungs, where in capillaries, where oxygen can get in, it does. That blood then comes right back to the heart, again to the opposite side. Right ventricle, out arteries, branch to capillaries, converge to veins and into the left atrium. When the left atrium contracts, our blood is back where we started in the left ventricle. Okay, so this pulmonary circuit is very short, right? Just to the lungs and back is literally a matter of a few inches. But this circuit, the systemic one, is very long. It goes from your heart down to the tips of your toes and back to your heart, up to your head, back to your heart. So there. Okay, so recognition of the chambers and valves of the heart and the blood vessels connected to it in dissected hearts. I've seen in an IB test a picture of a dissected heart, and they ask you to identify these parts, the chambers and the valves. I wish they had given names, because like a lot of names in biology, the valves are called different things in different places. I'm just going to use these because since they didn't list them here, which names they want you to use, that means they'll accept any of the names. Okay, so I'm going to use the ones that are in this diagram. And that's for the valves. Again, the chambers of the heart all have the same name, left and right, atrium and ventricle. Okay, so here's how you identify left from right. Every diagram you'll ever see is going to, like I said, be looking at what we call the ventral side. That's your front side. Not like ventral, ventricle, same kind of word, but the ventral side as opposed to the dorsal side. Most of you know that from dorsal fin on a shark is on its back. Ventral is the opposite of dorsal. So the ventral view is like you're looking at somebody straight on again, and that means even though this is on the left side of the diagram, it's actually the right side of this person. Okay, I think you got that figured out. But here's also the way structurally you can tell left from right ventricle. If you ask the question, which of these ventricles do you figure would have thicker muscular walls? The one that's got to push blood all the way to the bottom of your toes, or the one that's just got to push blood a couple inches next door? You would imagine that, I bet the process of evolution has resulted in about as efficient a pump as can be, which means it would be wasteful, so to speak, to make thick walls here if they didn't need to be that thick. And so here you can see, and they could have exaggerated it more, because if we dissect the heart, and I hope maybe we do, you'll see it really is pronounced. The thickness of the left ventricle is much thicker than the wall of the right ventricle. The atria walls aren't very thick at all, and you should be able to kind of predict that too, because they only have to pump blood like right below where they are. So they don't need very thick muscular walls. It's the ventricles which have evolved the thick walls, which you would have predicted from your knowledge of how natural selection works. So now, the valves between the atria and the ventricles are the easiest name to remember, atrioventricular, right? It's like there's only one place they could be, between the atria and the ventricles. These are the valves, however, the semilunar valves, which I think are also called mitral valves in some other ways. I don't know how you might remember it, semilunar, but one way you can is that they're kind of curved like the moon, lunar, the moon. There you go. You'll never forget that. Okay, so identifying left and right atria, left and right ventricle, and atrioventricular valves and semilunar valves. And aorta. I think they put aorta in there somewhere, so they could ask you that to identify the aorta. It is again coming from the left ventricle. It's coming up. It's then branching. These are those two arteries that go up either side of your neck. Those are called the carotid arteries, right? And then it takes a big turn down to take all that blood to everything below your heart. Okay, so now, here for the first time, we have some green ink. And that's the optional stuff. And if this was not 2020 and 2021, we would be doing this optional stuff because, that's the option we would have chosen, was human physiology. So I'm just going to touch on it a little bit because some of it bleeds over to the red ink stuff, as we'll see. But this also, a lot of it applies to other stuff that we've talked about, heart rate under different conditions. You would expect this to be a regulatory mechanism kind of thing if you thought about it. Yes? right? If my oxygen demands increase and the way my cells are getting oxygen involves this pump we call a heart, then when those demands increase, like when I start to exercise, I would expect my heart rate to go up, right? Simple kinds of logic, things like that, are also the part behind the explanation for why it has evolved in organisms to have a signaling system to cause that heart rate to go up in times when oxygen is needed more. So, um, the lump dump of your heartbeat is caused by the valves closing. That's what that says. They would want you to know that if we were taking the optional thing, but now you know it anyway. There you go. So that's a pretty good video. I'm not going to play it. So I hope that pause transitioned well. I had macaroni and cheese bacon. It's my mom's 95th birthday party today when I'm making this. And so I got to go soon. I'm going to see if I can get this done. Here. So here is in green again. Okay. So what this is about is just a structural, functional adaptation evolution thing. It could be part of a story they tell you. But the muscle cells that make up this special kind of muscle that we only find in the heart that we call cardiac muscle has a couple of key differences between it and your regular muscle cells like your bicep muscles. And one of them is that it's got a connection between the cells called intercalated discs, and it lets this electrochemical signal go through very quickly. So this would be a kind of cell-to-cell junction kind of thing. And this structure of them allows the propagation again of stimuli through the heart wall and allows it pretty quickly. Okay, so here you have a whole bunch of stuff, and I already talked about this, the delay between atrial contraction and ventricular. This is all green stuff, so I'm not gonna go over it too much, but I already did. What they would ask you to do if it was not 2020 is to take the parts of the heartbeat, which they said 1, 2, 3, 4 here, and match them up with that thing called an electrocardiogram, which is tracing the electrical activity of the heart. You can probably logically connect. Look at this big spike, right? What was like the biggest event in this heartbeat story? It's the contraction of the ventricles, and that's what that relates to. So you don't have to do that, so I'm moving on. Okay, so now I already said this, and now we're going to get a little more specific because they did, and this is in red ink, right? So the heart rate can happen without the brain, right? It initiates its own beat, but it can be increased or decreased, modulated. So this now becomes part of a regulation story in the system, not gene regulation in this case, but system regulation, which also means what? Negative feedback stuff, right? So this could be worked into that kind of story. And two nerves come from that part of the brain, which means they might ask you to know that part of the brain, the medulla, right? Those two nerves, they don't specify, although they might later when we get the nervous system, I forget. One of them makes the heart beat faster, and one of them makes it beat slower. And this is the case with a whole lot of organs. They have two nerves, one kind of activates them and one inhibits them, deactivates them. But then the other big regulatory system that we have evolved to have is that one that has to do with hormones. And the endocrine system with glands like the pancreas and the nervous system are so intertwined that some body parts are both like part of both systems. And this stuff now is what we also call adrenaline. And since they use the English version, I think this is the British version, epinephrine, that means they're going to use that on the test, okay? And you already know that what that's going to do for heart rate is increase it. This is part of the fight or flight response, as it's called. I'm sure we'll get to that in nervous system, and I think we already have in uh, just just basic integration of negative feedback kind of systems. Okay, here I already told you we can use an artificial pacemaker to regulate heart rate.